Finally, Dr. Marwan Darweish from Coventry University on growing militarization in Palestine.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for everybody here for organizing this event. The topic of militarization in Palestine and Israel, because I'll talk about both, is obviously wide, very topic. But I will present some ideas, some reflections. There isn't yet a paper or a coherent sort of body, but I wanted to focus in two aspects: the militarization of culture and politics in the Israeli Jewish society. I'm not going to talk about arm industry and export, etc. And the other theme is the militarization of the Palestinian society within Israel. And as you know, 20% of the Palestinians managed to stay in their homeland after the Nakba, after 1948, and the formation of the State of Israel. A population today, Palestinians in Israel, about 1.5 million. Generally, I would say they are discriminated against in most spheres of life. So I wanted to start first by telling you two stories. The first story that I heard from an Israeli Jewish colleague. This friend told me that during the war in Gaza in 2014, her daughter, 6-year-old daughter, came one day from school, very proud and pleased that she wrote a card and made a drawing like everybody in class, and which they sent to soldiers in the front line in Gaza as act of support. So that is the first story. The second story is what happened with me probably just under 2 years ago. I was visiting my family in Israel, in Palestine, within Israel. And so during my visit, and one evening, I heard loud automatic gunfire outside our home. And this went on for maybe for half an hour. I mean, I am talking about automatic gunfire that we were completely scared and terrified. I rang the police to report it and to say that we are very scared, and my family, nothing happened, and the shooting continued. I rang again and nothing happened. I rang the third time and I said, you know, like trying to appeal to them to come and do something. And they said to me, if you ring again, we will come and arrest you. So, and I obviously didn't do anything. But the two stories for me illustrate the normalization of militarism and violence within these two societies. So let's go back to the postcard. In my view, this tells us a lot about militarization of Israeli society and educational system. And just briefly, I'm not going to go in much details. I wanted to say that, well, first of all, Israel has a conscription law, so that women have to serve 28 months in the army, and men have served 32 months. Militarization in the education system in Israel, I would say it is interconnected, inseparable part of the military discourse, narrative, structure. So militarization is reflected in the curricula from age 1 to high school to university. The army is actually the identity that Israelis seek to embrace. This is the ideal sort of image that we ask to embrace. It is the model of the leadership in society. It's through the army. It's the opportunity for the future. If you want to any business, it's the opportunity for the future for any employment. It is the future and the route for politics. So, for example, almost nobody in the Israeli politics I'm not talking that they just served the 3 years. They've been most of their career in the military. And I will just want to show you just a few photos that will illustrate this narrative. Let me try. Can't you see it? No. Why can't we see it? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Share screen. Yeah. So, okay. So let's start from here. So this is a photo of, and one side you see soldiers giving a lecture about leadership in class for middle school with the gun in the floor and the students in front. And the other one is teacher soldiers. Sometimes they go and they teach in primary schools, and you could see all the kids around the soldiers with hats and already sort of embedded in this discourse. Let's take another example, which is maths. If you don't know maths, here is an example of how to do maths. So how many guns, how many aircrafts, how many tanks would be? So this is, I would imagine, for year 1, maths. So this is what we, educating for. And here is the top, where is the top military, the top Ministry of Education exchange between head of military and the Ministry of Education heads in the South District. This is from the Facebook of the Ministry of Education, not from. So this is the messaging that that Israeli public, Israeli kids will be raised. So let me go back then to summarize this and go beyond just what we saw. The Israeli narrative also makes a clear connection between the Jewish persecution in Europe, that reflects on all the curricula, militarism and independence. So for example, we have within 12 days, the Holocaust Memorial Day, the Memorial Day of the fallen soldiers of the wars of Israel, and the celebration of Independence Day. This narrative, this connection between them is, for me, is so powerful that the message is of existential narrative, that militarism and military parades in Independence Day is open for everybody to go and visit the camps, military camps, and public are invited to exhibitions about militarism, about the military, almost in every place in the country. So this is in education. Now, if we come to the public space, I mean, hospitals, cafes, restaurants, any public space, you will find the same message. And let me show you some of the pictures. Here is a cafe, and here is something in the middle of town. So you can see somebody buying coffee. This is part of the norms. We walk with guns, and you see aircrafts in the middle of public space. So before I move to the politics, so there is a normalization of weapon and militarization in the public space. As I say, this has become to the point that it's not even questions. I've been there, it's become part of the norm. You don't even question it. But luckily, because I go in and out of the country, it's sort of every time it shocks me. I mean, there are organizations that challenge this narrative, like gun-free kitchen tables, because guns are also brought home. You know, if you serve or if you've done your reserve, you come back home with your gun. So you put it in your kitchen or in your sofa. So there is an organization called Gun Free Kitchen Table, Israeli organization, Jewish organization. And there is another organization which is called New Profile, which is an organization that challenged the whole militarism of Israeli society. In terms of politics, there is typical in Israeli election campaign, the competition is between candidates who is more hardliner, who is going to be more, who has more career, CV in the military establishment. And I'll just show you a couple of examples. This is Ehud Barak. He was minister for years, Minister of Defense. He'd been for many years in the establishment. And he was also in politics. He was prime minister. He ran to different. So here is something from his program, election program. So I don't, in Hebrew, there's a translation. I don't care where Barak lives. My boy is in the army, and I want to sleep easy because we need a responsible adult, which is Barak. So again, here, Israel Beitenu, it's a right-wing, mostly supported by Russian population in Israel, shows the issue of militarism and equality. And I'll just read the quote. Every new citizen must accept the obligation to serve the country in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, or national civilian service. Only those who sign this declaration will be entitled to full citizen right. I mean, can you leave Israel aside and put this in another context around the world? What an outrage would be. And I don't want to read even the lines before, because it's talking about Jewish state and respecting their symbols, respecting sovereignty. But this is the narrative, yeah, that comes around militarization. So the last one, which is militarism and sexism and gender, a typical, yesterday somebody sent me a video about the military, the Israeli companies created to be proud of the cooperation between India and Israel. Rafael, I'll share it with you if you want to see it. But it's the most, I would say, colonial, racist way of presenting this relationship between India and Israel through the militaristic sort of lenses. So let me move on to the other side of the militarization, which is the this is about exporting the occupation, but that's not, we're not talking about this. Let me move to the other story, which is my story about the gunfire that I witnessed. I would like to look at different type of militarization happening within this Palestinian minority inside Israel. So just to start, to say that it is estimated that there are about 400,000 illegal small firearms within the Palestinian community in Israel. We are talking 1.5 million. There are about 400,000, almost between 3-4 people would be one gun. You can buy it for 200 pounds. You can buy Bristol if you want something. M16, for example, machine gun, automatic, about for 3,000 pounds. Most of it comes from the army, the Israeli army. The vast majority comes from the army, smuggled, state, crime. Very, very small number comes through, smuggled through the border between Egypt or Jordan. I want to highlight this connection between militarism and the availability of guns and violence in the Palestinian society. If you have guns so much free, available, then the chances to use it is very, very high. And I wanted to contrast this to say that 20 years ago, it was almost unheard of to have illegal arms within this Palestinian community, almost unheard of. It was a shame if you had a gun, because also you could have a gun legally, you can apply for a gun and get it. The other group that have thousands of illegal guns is the Israeli Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. We don't know exact number, but there is different figures from 100,000 to 200,000 of arms, illegal arms that in the hands of the settlers. So I want to argue that in both cases, the question that we need to ask is the use of these guns, how they're used and who they're being used against. And unfortunately, in both cases, it's against the Palestinian community. It is against the Palestinians in the settler used against the Palestinian in the West Bank, villages, towns, farmers mostly in areas. And there are several reports by B'Tselem, the Human Rights Israeli Organization, Human Rights Watch, about settler violence in the West Bank and the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian in Israel use it against members of their community. So it is related to crime, gun crime, and sometimes, and I witnessed this, just a protection because there is no feeling of safety and security. So even if you are, people I know that I even didn't think that they will be holding guns, when we interviewed them and asked them, they said, I just want, just for protection, just safety. So, but what happens that the easy availability of guns and lack of accountability makes it almost casual and normal to use guns. So if you had a little fight or dispute, youth in the street about anything, that could very quickly escalate, and if it escalates, it will escalate to using guns. Normalizing the existence and the use of guns in the Palestinian society in Israel, this is, as I said, a normal phenomenon. It could be, as I said, small dispute that escalated. This is, in my view, the best way of destroying the Palestinian society in Israel from within. And I would argue this is not something new to us in colonial sort of power and colonial, let them kill each other. Okay, so let me try and conclude in the last 2 minutes. So there is in the recent few years, there is a witnessed significant increase in violence as a result within the Arab Palestinian society in Israel. And according to a study that we conducted, in 2020, about gun crime, we found that 575 cases of murder took place between 2011 and 2019. And in 2019 alone, 85 murders took place within this community, making a 60% increase from 2016. And the most homicide deaths the community has seen since 1948. Majority of them, 51% of them, under the age of 30. So young people we are talking. These rates far exceed typical rates among Jewish population in Israel. In 2018, for example, the murder rate in the Arab society in Israel was more than 5 times the rate in the West Bank and 8 times the rate among Jewish community. So you can see the connection of arms, availability of arms, and the potential of destruction that this is making. In the research that we conducted, I could talk more about it, but we identified, some of the drivers that leading to this situation. We are in the early stage, but we are engaging at the moment, and this is where, community engagement and nonviolence comes. We are engaging with communities, first of all, to share the finding, and then to try and ask them what can be done, not with the police, but you as a community. Where is the agency? Where is the, that you can take a small steps to at the community level, at the national level, and the state level. And one of the things that we just exploring is creating safer space, creating mentoring. We sort of thinking of different ideas of how to go about creating alternative discourse, alternative models. Last sentence, to say that I want to conclude that there is a policy by Israel to allow and normalize the use of gun violence within the Palestinian society in Israel, as long as it's not used as part of the armed struggle or against Israeli Jewish community. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions and any clarifications.